Hello everyone, welcome to week number 4 in Bio 120. This is a busy week for us, so let us get going very quickly here. All right, last week was all about classification of organisms. You learned about the prokaryotes, which are the bacteria, and eukaryotes, which are everything else, animals, plants, fungi, protists. So you learned about classification, you learned about types of cells and how bacterial cells are very different from ours. And that's how antibiotics can kill bacteria and not kill us. You learned about the different cell structures, from cell walls, which we do not have, to ribosomes, etc. There are lots of differences between our cells. You learned about antibiotic resistance in bacteria and how this develops very, very quickly in populations, and the things that we do that encourages this phenomenon, which is not a good thing. We've got to stop that, or we are going to run out of effective antibiotics. So this week is all about metabolism. Metabolism is defined as all the chemical processes that happen in cells. When you talk about metabolism in your life, you're probably talking about how you break down food, make energy, and make fat cells. That's probably what you think of. But that's not really the definition of metabolism. It's all the chemistry that goes on in cells. And we want to focus this week on the breakdown of food and also the production of food through photosynthesis. But breaking down food, we as human beings do something called aerobic respiration. And aerobic tells you that oxygen is involved. When we break down a molecule of glucose through aerobic respiration, it's a series of biochemical steps that happen where glucose is broken down to produce carbon dioxide as a waste product through the use of oxygen. And the whole goal of this is to make a whole bunch of ATP molecules. So ATP molecules are energy molecules that fuel all the biochemistry that's going on in our cells. It's like the gasoline that runs your car, right? That's ATP. Okay, aerobic respiration is a very efficient process. To break down one glucose molecule, we can make up to 38 ATP molecules from one molecule of glucose. Now, that's hypothetical. We usually make around between 30 and 34 ATPs, but that's still very efficient. All right, there are some organisms on the planet that do not use oxygen, and these are called anaerobes. They use anaerobic respiration, which is basically aerobic respiration without a bunch of the steps. And they do not use oxygen. They use other molecules to finish up this process. And they are much less efficient at doing this than through aerobic respiration. So they make lots less ATP. Well, what's the benefit of this? They can survive without oxygen. We cannot. You cut off our oxygen supply and we are not going to survive. Some of the anaerobes also can use a process called fermentation. Fermentation is another anaerobic process without oxygen. And this is a very much shortened up version of aerobic respiration. It's really just glycolysis, which you're going to learn about this week. And then a short fermentation pathway. And you know fermentation because of, fermentation of yeast to make bread or alcoholic beverages or something like that, right? So you make alcohols, acids, gases through fermentation. Anaerobic respiration and fermentation do not use oxygen, and they are much less efficient in making ATP molecules. But the benefit of this is that these organisms can survive without oxygen. All right, so you're going to learn about that. I have a short video that will help you understand this. Skim through chapters 6, 7, and 8. They are very intensive. That's all I can say. They're very intensive. You do not have to memorize all of that. Just skim through the chapters so you know where everything is. Watch my video on aerobic versus anaerobic processes. This will help you. It's really short, and it will help you answer your questions this week. Read through the module for introduction and overview, and watch the video on the carbonated ocean, which is one of the problems that climate change has caused for us. Then, this week, you have a lot of assignments, and you have one tremendously important assignment. So I'm just saying, this is really intensive this week. Well, I use that word again. Anyway, there's a lot going on in week number 4. So, for example, you have discussion board postings. You're going to answer the question in your initial post, whether photosynthesis and cellular respiration, that aerobic respiration, those processes are opposite of each other, complementary, or both. Whenever anybody asks you a question like this, you know the answer is both. It has to be both. Otherwise, they wouldn't add that. They just say, are they opposite or complementary? Okay, so why is this important? Because those organisms that do photosynthesis take sunlight energy and carbon dioxide, and what do they make? Glucose. And what was I talking about with aerobic respiration? You break down glucose to make ATP molecules. So, one other hint that these have to be both opposite and complementary is that every organism that does photosynthesis also does aerobic respiration. Yeah. So there's got to be some connection here, and you're going to figure that out. You'll also answer the question, are autotrophs, and autotroph just means self-feeder. These are the organisms that do photosynthesis. Are they the foundation of all ecosystems? All. That's a question, and you're going to figure that out. Then in your response post, you're going to talk about the release of excessive amounts of carbon dioxide and the consequences. And that's the reason that you watched that video on the carbonated ocean. That's one of the effects of the release of so much carbon dioxide through the burning of fossil fuels into the atmosphere. That's just one of the effects. All right, so you got discussion board postings. Initial due by Thursday, response post, 2 response posts are due by Sunday. Your journal entry, you have a journal assignment this week. And you're going to compare aerobic and anaerobic respiration processes. I just explained that, but I also have that in a video. That video is going to help you. How ancient is the process of glycolysis? Those are the first steps in aerobic respiration, anaerobic respiration, and fermentation. All 3 begin with a simple process called glycolysis. So you're going to look at that and figure out whether it is important and how ancient it must be because of characteristics of it, where it happens, how many organisms use it, etc. And you will talk about the use of ethanol as a biofuel. And pretty much anymore, all of our gasoline has been added to with ethanol unless you pay for the premium gas that has no ethanol in it. So you're going to discuss that. So far you got discussion board postings and a journal assignment. And then you got the biggest, most important part of your final project due this week too. Yeah, it's a crazy week, I told you. This is milestone 2 for your final project. And this is the biology behind your project. So this is the most important section of your final project. So let's talk about these items for just a minute. You're going to use the outline format. You're going to answer all these questions and include the headings. If you just write this as an essay and I have to guess what you're talking about, if I'm having to guess how you're answering these questions, that is not going to go well for either one of us. So include the headings so I know that you know what you're answering. So level of organization. Where does this affect the level of organization of living beings? Is it on the molecular level? So if you're talking about genetically modified things, this is on the molecular level, on the level of DNA. If you're talking about climate change, you're talking about the whole biosphere is affected. So every part of the earth where you find living beings, climate change affects. If you're talking about population ecology, it might be one particular ecosystem. If you're looking at something specific like loggerhead sea turtles or something like that. So where in the level of organization does your topic impact organisms? And excuse me, show how species and resources are affected. Analysis. What are 3 biological processes that are affected by your topic? All right, so say, for example, you're talking about climate change. The carbon cycle of the Earth is affected because more carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere than is normal, and this causes effects, right? But the carbon cycle. So in the analysis section, you're going to say that the carbon cycle is part of the issue of climate change. And then you're going to describe what the carbon cycle is. Then in section C, you're going to connect the carbon cycle to climate change, the relationship of these 3 biological processes to your topic. That is probably the most important section of your whole final project. Section C, the relationship of these biological processes to your topic. The characteristics of life, select one of these biological processes and analyze how the characteristics of life are affected by it. Impact on health. Take one of these biological processes and analyze the impact, positive and negative, on human and or environmental health. So if you're talking about air pollution, you can talk about how air pollution affects human health, like our respiratory system. Or you can talk about the environmental effects of air pollution, because air pollution affects plants, animals, water, every part of the environment. So support anything that you're talking about anywhere in this final project with real life examples. That's very important. So this is a huge, huge portion of your final project, and really the most important one, and the one where you may have the most questions. So with that being said, here's my tip of the week. Ask for help if you get stumped, because you may think, okay, I'm looking at population ecology. I don't know 3 biological processes or concepts that have to do with population ecology. Just ask me. I can help you. I always have some ideas, so just ask me, okay? m.sigmon@snhu.edu. That's where I am. I'm here for you to be a sounding board and to help you, okay? I promise I will. Sometimes I answer you immediately. I will always get back to you within 24 hours because I'm always on my phone just like you guys are, and I see when the emails pop up. So just ask me if you need some help. Isn't that a beautiful bird down there, Malachite kingfisher, that I saw in Africa last August? They were super hard to take a photo of. I don't know how many of them I took photos of, but I finally got some really good ones, and that was one. They're beautiful, beautiful little birds. So anyway, I hope that you have a great week. I'm headed to the beach for a few days, but I will be online. Ask me if you need something. I hope that you have a wonderful week, and I'll see you back here next week when I make another video. Ask me if you need some help.